Hi, folks. Welcome to the Politico Chat. It's Wednesday, March 23rd. I'm Alexander Trowbridge. Today we're looking at President Obama's tour of Latin America, where he visited Brazil, Chile, and El Salvador, all while juggling military action in Libya. For more on the trip, we're joined by Politico's Josh Gerstein down in El Salvador. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Sure, happy to do it.
Now, what did the president accomplish on this trip?
Well, I would say that the main accomplishment of the trip is sort of reinforcing the U.S.'s interest in Latin America and its seriousness about addressing the issues of concern to the region. While there are not a lot of emerging democracies here, they also have some pretty significant problems. The biggest one in many of these countries is probably narco-trafficking, drug trafficking, things along those lines, and issues about that business basically breaking down law and order and security. There are economic concerns, but a lot of these countries are actually doing a better job taking advantage of this economic rebound than some of the more industrialized countries like the U.S. That said, there haven't been a whole lot of huge announcements. There haven't been any big treaties. It's more an effort by President Obama, who really has barely spent any time in Latin America in his presidency. If you set aside Mexico, our neighbor, it's been very, very little time, and I believe hadn't even been to the region before, to basically, as I said, underscore their importance to the U.S. and to recognize the connections between those countries and the United States, the absolutely huge immigrant population that contributes to the U.S. and obviously contributes a lot of money to the economies down here.
Now, while he was on this trip, obviously major world events taking place, did the host countries feel like they were getting his full attention?
I think in some countries there may have been a tad of resentment about what happened, in others less concern. It just, I think, depends more on the individual country and what their attitude is, particularly the big news developments that went on during the trip regarding the situation in Libya. If you talk about Brazil, for example, that was a rather awkward situation. His hosts were fairly polite about it, but the reality is that the president ordered a military strike on Libya from the soil of a country that didn't believe that there should be military action taken to address the situation in Libya. That's somewhat awkward, even sort of going back historically for one leader to levy war, if you will, from another country. But, his hosts were pretty generous about that, but there's no question that it must have ticked them a little bit, given that the president was sometimes late for meetings. He was supposed to have a joint press conference with the president of Brazil and was more than an hour late for that, I think, because he had ducked out to have yet another extended conference call with Washington.
Right, and there's been so much ado about the timing of this trip, and the frequent defense of the White House has been that the president's communication system travels with him on this trip. From what you saw on the ground, did they live up to that promise?
Yeah, I mean, look, basically the president can do what he needs to do as commander-in-chief remotely from anywhere in the world. We've been through the Cold War where both the U.S. and Russia had their finger on the nuclear button, and presidents didn't stop traveling at that time. But if the real issue is is it any more awkward to be trying to do this in the middle of a presidential trip abroad, I would say, yeah, of course it's more awkward. I mean, it's certainly more awkward than just walking down to the Situation Room and convening everybody down there through a variety of, secure video links and so forth. There's no question that they've had to rejigger his schedule. They've pulled some of his, especially his sightseeing events, like the one he was supposed to do today at some Mayan ruins here in El Salvador. They just basically pulled that off the schedule altogether. So I would say it's been somewhat more awkward, but the notion that, it's somehow technically unfeasible for him to talk to people in Washington and make decisions or to be briefed on the situation, I think it would be an exaggeration. It's just maybe not quite as easy as it is back home.
And what does he face as he returns home?
Well, he faces, I think, members of both parties who are somewhat skeptical about this Libyan operation. I think what the White House is hoping for is that by the time he gets home, the U.S. can begin to scale down its involvement. They've already said that the U.S. is flying, I believe, fewer air missions over Libya than they did at the outset of this operation. And the White House is very insistent that there is going to be a transition to a coalition to enforce this no-fly zone in Libya. It sounds like it's going to be led by the French and the British with some help from various Arab allies, as well as some other countries in the Mediterranean area, perhaps Italy and so forth. And they are insisting that the U.S. can move to a support role that will involve sort of technical issues like surveillance and also things like refueling and logistics and so forth. But there's no question there's going to be a lot of questions for the administration to answer when they get back home, particularly about this key issue of how long this operation could go on for.
When you were down there, was there an excitement in the air? Were people excited that the Obamas were down there? And were they more excited in one country than they were in another?
I think there was a fair amount of excitement, I would say, in Brazil in particular over the Obamas. I don't know precisely why that was, but they seem to be excited to have them on the trip. Part of it is I think that Brazil feels that it's a real up-and-comer on the world stage, that it's one of the big rising powers. There's talk about these so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, India, and China, where their economies are coming on strong, and they're also trying to play a more significant role on the world stage. So I think it was important to them to have Obama come and sort of pay respects to Brazil, regardless of whether there were a lot of tangible accomplishments, to reinforce their place in the new world order that's developing. And so I think that contributed to sort of the fervor over the Obamas, the interest in everything ranging from, where they were going to visit to what they were going to eat. So I would say that the greatest excitement probably on the visit to Brazil.
Josh, thank you for coming on.
Okay, Alex, happy to do it. Take care.